I'm going to speak about something tonight that I've never spoken about before. We'll see how it goes. There are a lot of unsolved philosophical problems. Lots and lots. Now, there are at least two different ways to deal with a problem. One is to solve it, and the other is to show that for the problem to arise, certain conditions have to be met, and in fact they're never met. The problem isn't a genuine problem. So, what I'm going to describe tonight is the way the Torah in particular, and in some cases theistic belief in general, simply avoids the conditions under which the problem arises. They don't provide solutions to the problem, they just do an end run by describing the world in such a way that the problem can't arise. I'll try to make the difference intuitive to you between the two possible ways of dealing with the problem. Some people think there's a problem about God's foreknowledge and our free will. If he knows what the future is going to be, then we can't really make free choices. Now, to solve that problem, you'd have to show, yes, God knows the future, and yet we do have free will. There's a way of doing that. I'm not going to do it tonight. But there's a way of taking all of that as true and showing that you can solve it. Another way is what I believe is Maimonides' way, by saying we don't describe God. God's beyond all description, so we don't say that he knows. The problem doesn't arise. The problem is a conflict between A and B, and we just give up A. So there's no problem. That what we're going to do tonight is similar to what Maimonides does. I'm going to show you that the conditions that make the problem difficult don't arise in a Torah context. The point of this exercise is something I learned from a very famous philosopher named Alvin Plantinga, very excellent philosopher of logic, metaphysics, epistemology, and of religion. The overall idea, he calls it 24 or so arguments for the existence of God, approximately 24. And he went through a number of philosophical problems, and he points out that in a theistic context, these problems aren't nearly so difficult. There are ways forward to attack them and work on them. And in an atheistic context, it seems like they're hopeless. Now that means that the theistic context is friendlier to making progress in these problems than the atheistic context. And since these are problems that are pressing for solutions, that seems to be a reason to adopt a theistic context. Well, let's take a couple of, simple, not too sophisticated problems and see how it works. Imagine two people, each one has a gun, each one wants to kill Paul. Each one is an excellent shot, takes aim and fires at the same moment, from the same distance. Well, from the same distance, but not in the same direction. One is north of Paul firing south, and south of Paul firing north. And one's bullet flies true and kills Paul, and the other's bullet is blown aside by the wind and misses Paul. One is guilty of murder, the other is guilty of attempted murder. I think when we examine these two cases, I think we feel two contradictory feelings. On the one hand, one guy killed somebody. The other guy didn't kill somebody. Clearly, murder, or serious and attempted murder, you would expect the legal system to treat them differently. You feel morally that the one is much worse than the other. One guy took a life, the other person didn't take a life. That's a natural, intuitive feeling. On the other hand, the difference between the two of them is a gust of wind. A gust of wind wasn't under anyone's control. It's a kind of luck. The second one was lucky that the wind blew his bullet aside. Can something which is merely luck, over which you have no control, change the moral character of the action, the seriousness of the crime, the appropriateness of punishment. It seems like a gust of wind is the wrong kind of thing to make that kind of difference. What makes things serious is a person's intention and his purposes, his goals, and how he carries them out. Yeah, that certainly is a big part of what makes what he does significant, good or evil, and so on and so on. But then also, it seems, are the consequences. And in the case of one, the consequence was somebody dies. And in the case of the other one, nobody died. So I think we're sort of caught between two contradictory intuitions. And as I know the philosophical literature, there is no accepted solution to this problem. How should we feel about it? Why should we adopt one intuition rather than the other intuition? Is there some kind of compromise between the two intuitions that we could work out to have a more consistent picture? I don't know of anybody who has an understanding of what to do about this problem. Now, let's suppose you live in a society where you have a legal system and it treats them one way or another, and you're wondering whether the legal system is appropriate or not. In a Jewish religious perspective, the problem doesn't arise. And the reason it doesn't arise is this. There's a verse, Elokim nitzav b'adas kel. God is standing in the company of God. And the oral tradition explains the verse as follows. You have a court. The court is hearing a case. The judges sit. Judges sit. And that verse says this is the congregation of God, the court hearing a case, applying God's law to the case. What does it mean to say that God is standing? So I heard from Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yeshivat Ohr Somayach of Boston, many years ago. You have someone who invites people to his house. When they come in, who sits and who stands? The guests sit. The host stands to serve them, to offer them, to help give them what they need. When Moses entertains Yisro and all the elders, Moses is standing and serving. Yisro is sitting. To say that God is standing in the company of God in the court means God is the host. Judges are only guests, not their court. It's God's court. The decisions of the court are the right consequence for the accused, no matter what he actually did in this case, no matter whether the witnesses are lying, no matter whether there's a misunderstanding, because their decisions are the right decisions to have been made. Even if legal mistakes are made or factual mistakes are made, doesn't matter. The conduct of the court is something which is protected by divine providence. Sefer Chinuch points this out, as do other sources, which, by the way, for the aficionados who know something about this, means that's special and doesn't apply everywhere. That's why he has to point it out in the court circumstances. That's just a footnote to an aside. At any rate, comes out now that I don't have to figure out who is really more guilty. I don't have to figure out whose crime is really bigger. I don't have to figure out how the person should be treated. We have a court system. The court system is also issued by God. We apply it as best we can. We make mistakes. All human beings make mistakes. But God gerrymanders the circumstances that apply to the person so he gets what he needs. He gets what's important for him or right for him. So it's an end run on the problem. I don't have to solve this problem to know that what I'm doing in the world is correct. Zohar, in its introduction to Parshas Mishpatim, which is the parsha in which civil and criminal laws formulated in the Torah itself, the written Torah, says, Sidra Gugulaya, this portion of civil and criminal legal material is the order of transmigration of souls. Really? Gee, it looks like civil and criminal law. Oh, the Zohar tells the following story. A is walking through the forest with a bag of money on a trip, very tired. Sits down and lies back on a tree, oversleeps, wakes up, it's late in the afternoon, he's afraid to be late, and he runs off, leaving the bag of money behind. B is walking through the forest, and he sees a bag of money sitting next to a tree. So he picks up the bag of money, and he goes on. C is walking through the forest, and decides to take a nap at that very same tree, whereupon A realizes that he's lost his money, comes running back, sees C sleeping next to the tree, and no bag of money. Wakes up C and says, "Where's my money?" And A says, "You're an apparition from the moon." Like, what do you mean? What money? You're lying. You stole it. You must be hiding it. And he beats him up. Why did that happen? Tell you why. Because in a previous incarnation, A and B had a disagreement about some money. A was lying and forced B to give him money that he didn't owe. That's why A in this incarnation lost the money and B found it, right? And C was the judge who said the money should be transferred. That's why he got beat up. So you're looking at this particular incident on its own. You don't know the background. And since you don't know the background, you don't know that what's happening now is really what needs to happen. So the problem of what some call moral luck, a circumstance which is, from the point of view of the agents, pure luck, affects our judgment as to the seriousness of what they do, and are at a loss to figure out how we should think about what they did and what should happen to them, is simply avoided by the idea of divine providence, where divine providence will take care that what they need actually is what they will get. And of course, what they need is not dependent only on this particular circumstance. It's dependent upon all sorts of circumstances that we can't appreciate. This is an example of how, from a religious perspective, a certain philosophical problem is simply avoided.
So when it comes to actual, I guess, the way that it's more like it's presented in the literature, when it comes to the actual whether or not he did something wrong, is that problem not then addressed within Torah literature?
I mean, he certainly did something wrong.
Sorry, wrong as in, is it
Attempted
wrong?
murder is wrong.
So I should say, did he do something equally wrong as if he was to kill the person? Is that problem, would that iteration be addressed?
So what I'm telling you is that it's avoided. The problem no longer presses on any practical decision, and it no longer presses on, I know that he's going to get what he deserves. That's all. And it becomes an idle thing. In moral philosophy, it's not idle at all. These things happen all the time. Yeah. These decisions on how to treat people are made all the time. And people are dealing with it, but feeling very uncomfortable that they're doing things that they can't justify. That just drops away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a clarification. So you think that when the court judges, however the court judges is true, or God will sort of guide the court to judge truthfully, but they might occasionally make mistakes?
You see, now I'm going to give you a piece of advice, which I give to other people as well. If you use a word in asking your question that I have not used, you have to worry that you're not asking, you're talking about the same topic. I didn't use the word true since I sat down tonight. And you use the word true. So you have to think, am I talking his language? Am I dealing with the situation that he's dealing with? I didn't say true because I didn't want to say true. I wanted to say what needs to happen is happening. The right thing is happening to him. It has nothing to do with whether it's true or not. That's all I was dealing with. Truth is a different concept, but with different implications. Here's another moral problem which people struggle with in secular philosophy. You probably have all heard this idea. I'm going out with my wife to dinner. We're going to spend 150 shekels on dinner. Now, it could very well be that 150 shekels donated to a charity will save some person's life. People in the world who need basic medical materials or purified water or whatever it is. And it could be that the person in the world with this 150 shekels could have his life saved if I give it to them. What right do I have to go out to dinner with my wife if that money could save a life? Surely the trivial pleasure, okay, it's not exactly trivial, but it's small scale pleasure that I have going out with my wife at the supper is not comparable to the saving of a life. Well, that seems right, certainly. But then it's not just this dinner, it's next month's dinner and next year's dinner and all the dinners, each one of them, forever, never to go out to a restaurant. What about heating your apartment? Instead of keeping it at 70 degrees, in the winter, keep it at 60 degrees. You won't die. You won't die. The extra money that you're saving on fuel can be sent to save someone's life. So you'll be uncomfortable and his life will be saved. What right do you have to be comfortable? New clothes, books, paying for your internet connection. What is there that you have that wouldn't be worth giving up to save a life? When you try to apply this philosophy consistently, you end up with the idea that your standard of living shouldn't be any higher than the barest minimum to survive, and the rest of it should be given to other people so they can survive. Now, maybe this is just hopelessly prejudiced, but it seems wrong. It seems that we don't really have an obligation to give up everything above bare subsistence in order to save other people's lives. Now, maybe you could just say, well, that's wrong. You're just being selfish, and you're not paying attention to the demands of morality. But others feel that, here's where people like Peter Singer just get it upside down. After all, what am I appealing to when I tell you this story? I'm appealing to think about it and think about how you feel about it. Well, that's what your moral judgments are basically based on, moral intuitions. Intuitions about particular cases, intuitions about relationships between principles. That's how you make moral judgments. You say, well, if I make this judgment, I'm going to violate that judgment with its intuition, and then I got this judgment with this intuition. I have to try to make sense out of all of them. It's something called reflective equilibrium. You reflect on the possibilities, and you bring them into a circumstance which is with least tension, least contradiction, least competition. Well, one of them is, I don't have a responsibility to impoverish myself to save other people. Maybe even saving their lives is not a duty of mine, a responsibility of mine. Maybe it's praiseworthy, but maybe it's not a responsibility. And people go back and forth on this. Now, the way the Torah avoids this problem is by decreeing that you don't own anything. There's no such thing as property. There are resources that are allotted to you to enact what the owner, capital O, desires be done with these resources. You're a worker in a company whose resources all belong to the company. You're working for IBM. The computer at your desk belongs to IBM. You can't take it home to play three-dimensional games on. You can't do that. So we are allotted resources and given instructions by the owner, capital O, what is to be done with those resources. And somebody says, why don't you give more money to charity? The right answer is, I don't give any money to charity. Not my money. I don't have any money. You want to know why more of the money in my bank account doesn't go to charity? Ask the owner. He gave me instructions. I'm following his instructions. 20%, and that's it. So this again is a case where people have difficult intuitions and difficulty in articulating what the appropriate thing to do is, and it's just taken out of our hands. It's the second case. Here's the third case. These are easy ones. I'm going to come to some slightly more difficult ones in a minute. You may have heard this idea. I remember living through the period when astronomy and cosmology took off. What will be the end of the universe? The Big Bang or the Big Crunch, the heat death of the universe. In the end, it'll all be gone. It'll all be wiped out. Either it'll all be free energy with heat death, or there'll be a new contraction, bounds of universes. Everything will be squashed into a lack of form, like a black hole. Has no structure. And it'll all be wiped out. So whatever we're doing, whatever we're creating, whatever we're building, it's all destined to simply disappear. Now, many people became very pessimistic because of that reflection. Seemed like nothing really matters if it's all going to be squashed or dissipated into nothing. Poetry was written about that, plays were written about that idea of the pessimism of the picture of the end of the universe. Some smart people, like Thomas Nagel, suggested an alternative way of looking at it. He said, look, what are you doing? You're picturing yourself at the end. At the end, you see nothing of any significance, no structure, no meaning, no value, no whatsoever. You're saying, aha, that's where it's all going to end up. So, looking back from where it's going to all end up, all of this is just fluff, it's just fantasy. It doesn't really matter because that's where it's going to end up. You're using how it looks when it's going to end up to judge the significance of now when we're in the middle of the story. He said, why don't you try the reverse? Use where you are now to judge the significance of the end of the story. Right now, this is just and this is unjust. This is kind and this is unkind. This is productive and this is creative and it's revolutionary and this is boring or this is retarded, like the progressives or anti-progressives. And so I didn't say that. And I don't do politics. Leave it alone. Right? And this person really did something to promote justice. That's real. And if in the end of time it's all wiped out, that means the end of time doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the end is going to be wiped out. Now it is what it is, and it has the value that it has. And from the point of view of the end of time, it doesn't matter. The end of time itself is insignificant. It's a non-significant point of view. Don't pay any attention to it. You have a tension between 2 points of view and what their judgments will be on the nature of the story. Who says the end of time judgment is the more accurate, more realistic, more justifiable than the present point of time. And you have the literature going back and forth on this issue. And it's quite difficult because, again, these are intuitions where you think of yourself at the end of time. You look back and say, well, it was all, frivolous, it was all froth, it was all play because none of it lasts. On the other hand, you say, what do I care whether it lasts or not? Well, it's there, it has its meaning that it has. We avoid that problem, the whole set of issues by saying that there is an eternity and it doesn't disappear. It doesn't disappear. On the contrary, it's all built, it's all exists, it's all eternal. Everything that you build in this life is eternal. It's always meaningful, always valuable, it's always significant. So the conditions of the problem aren't realistic from the point of view of a religious perspective. Yeah. I'll tell you, I used a word that is a very tricky word, and word that's debated like everything else in philosophy, and that's the word intuition. How to classify intuitions is quite difficult. Quite difficult. Whether there is an emotional component to intuitions, quite difficult. In fact, I heard just over the weekend from my Rabbi something from the Maharal, which I haven't had a chance to look up yet, which I found astonishing in terms of what I know about contemporary philosophy. He says that emotions are the way in which we classify actions in terms of their nature and significance. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is portrayed as dealing with the world with midos, what we think of as character traits, even though strictly speaking is not true. It's absolutely false. God has no character traits. But when we talk about God's anger or God's pleasure or God's happiness and so forth and so on, Nachas Ruach, all the literature uses, it's using our emotional terms because otherwise we wouldn't have a way to classify the actions that we want to put together and treat in a similar way. Our emotions become an instrument of our intellect. A part of the intellect is to use emotions as the basis for concepts so cruelty, for example, right? Cruelty is an emotion that we recognize. Generosity is an emotion that we recognize, which carries with it a certain intellectual content, but the feeling that you have for it can be what the source of defining the contours of the content are. That's a fascinating idea. Ahavdil Thomas Damasio made a big hit in the neurological world by saying that emotions are necessary for rationality. In Descartes' error, where you think of thinking versus the body, and the body carries the emotions, as if you could think without emotions. He says you can't. You can't think without emotions. And the Maharal, who predates him by 400 years, saying a similar thing. At any rate, so I don't know. I don't want to exclude emotions from the picture. I think it's a good question. I haven't come to a final understanding of it, but I don't want to exclude them. Yeah.
Wait, so like, is the idea there that emotions let you like feel out an object of an idea like you do with your hands? So like you get a sense of like its shape, or you have a better understanding of what it is?
Insofar as I've gotten into this, a concept is a piece of your mental machinery. Concepts are mental. And the question is, what kind of mental thing is it? Concept collects together. I'm going to talk about collections in a few minutes. Collects together things and puts them into one category. How do concepts do that? It's a big discussed area. Some think that there are certain abstract qualities that the concept dictates, and the things are in the group if they have the qualities. There's another model for how concepts work is there's a single thing, and the other things get into the category by being sufficiently similar to the single thing. So you have one thing plus a measure of similarity. That's how you it's not clear what the mechanism is. What seems to be suggested here is that one mechanism, not all mechanisms, one mechanism is the emotion that you have towards the thing. So a certain class of actions will be the actions to which you have this emotion that will classify them as importantly significant and similar, and get similar treatment. But the classification will be based on the emotional reaction, right? Not on the perceptual reaction or some other type of reaction. And I think it's a fascinating idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just make sure I understand. So let's go back to the first example you gave, the case with moral luck. Is it an issue for then the ethicist, let's say, who holds attempted murder is as bad as murder? Are they contradicting the world? Even though we would say that this question would be irrelevant, the case of justice and whatnot would be relevant from a Torah perspective, is there an issue to have such rulings on it? To have such, let's say my ethical intuition suggests this, is that still a problem to suggest then that something it's actually, as my ethical intuition is actually reflecting something, is it actually is wrong? Does that problem, does that ruling contradict anything that we...
Well, I don't know. The way you're describing it is too simple. It's not that I have a ruling and my intuition that's wrong. I have contradictory intuitions. Not ruling versus intuition. It's intuition versus intuition. Whatever I do, I'm going to feel it's wrong.
Sure, that's why I give an example of an ethicist who holds specifically to one intuition.
Yeah, but that's not realistic. That's not where we are. Yeah, there are two types of controversies. That's where one person disagrees with another person, and where you have a disagreement in your own mind. You don't know what to think. A morally sensitive person who understands the issues is divided in his own mind. If he's not divided in his own mind, then he's out of touch with what we were talking about. Too many people see it so in the same way. There's a serious problem here. He says, it's not a problem. One side doesn't count. Now, I don't believe he understands it.
I mean, moral philosophers do rule on the matter. Some hold to certain positions. So the virtue ethicists would hold that these two positions are equally as bad. They wouldn't see as one worse than the other. So, I mean, there are cases.
Yeah, that's fine. But that's a way of dealing with the contradiction. It's not avoiding the contradiction.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I understand how is the point that you're making related to my project? That's what I don't get.
I'm just wondering if you're trying to say that such solutions are either A, something that the Torah doesn't discuss, or B, it would be such solutions are in contradiction. That's what I wanted to know.
I think that it's apples and oranges because, from the Torah's point of view, the reality of the world is one in which the issue doesn't come up.
Okay.
So you can solve it or not solve it. That's an independent project.
Okay, so people who are solving it aren't doing anything in contradiction with...
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say anything in contradiction, no. Okay, now, let's take a somewhat more subtle issue. We are able to think about things. If I tell you, think about the White House, or think about the recent war in Gaza, or think about the fact that water is made of two gases. Think about something as an experience that you have. You all know it. It's factual. What makes what's going on in you to be about that? What's the connection between you sitting here in Jerusalem and the White House when you're thinking about the White House? And that's a very difficult and I would say poorly understood idea. But here's something worse, much worse. What about that? Those black squiggles on the board, these squiggles, this design is about some residents in Washington? What kind of connection is that? These squiggles. What is it in the squiggles that connects them with the structure of Washington?
I don't see the problem in either one of those.
Oh, good. Well, you have a great future in philosophy if you can answer either one of them in any respect whatsoever. I'll just give you a little thing to think about in terms of a problem, right? Can I think about Santa Claus?
Sure.
But there isn't a Santa Claus.
Okay.
Well, if so, then how can thinking about be a relationship to a thing when there's no thing?
Why does thinking about a thing always mean that the relationship is to a physical object? It could be to a concept. You're relating to a concept. Santa Claus is fake thing in your head.
Yeah, but then the question is, thinking about Santa Claus and thinking about the White House, certainly not going to be the same thing. After all, the White House isn't a concept.
Well, it is both a concept and a real thing.
No, the White House isn't a concept. The White House is made out of marble.
Yeah.
Concepts aren't made out of marble.
That you can conceptualize in your head.
That's right.
Your
That,
residents,
you can have a
they
concept. You can have a concept of the White House. You can, but the concept is one thing, and the White House is something else.
So you have a relationship with two separate things.
So, correct. Now the question is about one of those relationships. How about the one with the marble thing in America? What's that relationship?
Is that it's real that I'm thinking about it?
That was the question. That can't be the answer. The question was, what does it mean to be thinking about it? What is it about you that makes what you're thinking about it? So you say, well, I'm thinking about it. That's not answering the question. So now the idea here is this. Okay, this one thing we know is for sure that we do think about things. That's something that we all experience. We all take for granted. We understand it. Right? And maybe we could make progress if we reduced one to the other. If this squiggle here being about the White House is because this squiggle here affects my mind. And it triggers in me my thinking about the White House. Then I wouldn't have a separate problem about this being about the White House. It wouldn't be a separate problem. It'd be reduced to one problem. Progress is made when you reduce two problems to one problem. In other words, it isn't about the White House. I can think about the White House. It isn't about the White House. We say it is because it enables me to. It's sort of like saying, how do scalpels do surgery? People do surgery and scalpels do surgery. But how do the scalpels do the surgery? Because the person's holding it, you see, and he's doing the cutting with the scalpel. It's not a separate thing. So it's a person with the scalpel. The person's doing surgery. The scalpel's only the tool. So I don't have a problem how scalpels do surgery. They don't do it. Same thing with artificial intelligence, which is surely artificial, but it's not intelligence. The only intelligence is in the mind of the people who interpret it. And that's a long story, but I can do that another time. Anyway, the same thing's true here. Now, that means that all aboutness depends upon a mind. All aboutness depends upon a mind. It's not in the squiggles. Well, what about combinations of English words that have never been written down, that have never been thought? Suppose I'm the first one to think a certain combination of English words. Did it not have a meaning beforehand? Because no one had ever thought it? Is the meaning only in what it does to a mind? Okay, now suppose there is a mind that's thinking all of it all the time. Suppose there's a mind that includes all of it all the time. That would solve the problem, because only minds really are about. Only minds thinking are really about. The squiggles are never about, they're just, we say they're about because they connect to the mind that's doing the thinking. And if you have God's mind always having all these thoughts, then all these things will be meaningful because of what's going on in God's mind. God's mind fills in the empty space for something which otherwise would require a mind to give it meaningfulness. There's room to move. There's room to develop. There's room to pick out the details and match up the details. Whereas if you have just the squiggles without a mind, it seems hopeless. What do these squiggles have to do intrinsically, inherently, to the physical structure? They have no similarity or connection to that marble structure in Washington at all. So it seems like it's a hopeless problem. And it's been a hopeless problem for hundreds of years to try to figure this out, even more than hundreds of years. Now, a little bit more abstract problem, which is very similar, is this. Problem of sets. Maybe some of you have heard of set theory, which is a branch of mathematics. Sets, collections. Let's think for a little bit about numbers. What do numbers count? There are 31 students in the class. What's 31? 31 doesn't go on each student. Each student is one. So what does the 31 apply to? 31 what? Well, intuitively the idea is take them all together. So take them all together in one group, and then the group is 31. The group has 31 members. 31 is the size of the group. Okay. Take them all together. You mean put them all in the same room? Well, not really. You don't have to put them all in the same room to say there are 31 members in the class. No? Well, okay, but you said take them all together. What do you mean? Tie them up? Put them in a box? What do you mean take them all together? Well, some say consider them all together. Consider them all together. Sort of like taking 5 globs of batter and mixing them all in one big bowl and making one big batter all together? Well, not really, because then you had 5 little batters and you got one big batter. You haven't got 5 batters. Oh, so I'm supposed to take them all together without putting them together. I gotcha. That's very meaningful. Take them all together without putting them together. Well, this is sort of not what I meant. Together doesn't mean physically together. Oh, it doesn't mean physically together. I bet you're a materialist, huh? You only believe in the physical, nothing beyond the physical? So you explain to me then, how do I take them all together without physically putting them together? What's going on? So, and then, suppose one of them is Julius Caesar, who's 2,000 years dead, and my first great-great-great-grandchild was not yet born, and Xi Jinping, whoever his name is in China, can I put them together as a group and say that there are 3 of them? Certainly can, but one's 2,000 years dead, one's not yet born, one's in China. Doesn't matter. You just take them together. You sort of put them together and sort of make them together, and then, right? So then say, well, okay, it sounds to me you're talking about psychology. You're talking about sort of thinking them together, so considering them together. I can sort of relate to that because I do things like that. But then let me ask you a question. Suppose there were no human beings, like according to the official so-called scientific history of the world, 2 million years ago there were no human beings. And 2 billion years ago there were no creatures who could do anything like what we call thinking. Were there no numbers then? No numbers? Nothing had a real size, temperature, area, lifespan? We do apply numbers to those times. Is it just that the numbers came into existence with us and then before that there weren't any numbers? How did they manage with physics on those? How did the interactions take place? How could the numbers describe them? Isn't there some kind of problem here? But now suppose you have a single mind that has all these concepts going on all the time, simultaneously. Then all the groups are there mentally. They're there mentally already. We can imitate that. We're taking that group, which is already grouped in the mind of God, so to speak, and then we're thinking about that group. We don't have to create the group. Mental activity does create it, and it doesn't have to be our mental activity. If that's the case, then you have a way to explain how numbers work, even when there are no people, to have the mental process of grouping together. Otherwise, it looks like it's a tough problem. Yeah.
It seems to me not so tough. You can consider those things 2 billion years ago, having those properties, but the way we relate to understand those properties is through certain concepts of measurements that we apply to sensing those properties through various means. Meaning that the properties always existed. There were hot things, but I relate to hotness with the word hot and understanding what that means through my own experiences and all that stuff. But it was always hot, it always will be hot, regardless of whether I can conceive of that. It's just you don't have to call it hot. It still has that property.
See here again, I didn't use properties at all. I didn't mention properties. So I'm not exactly sure whether you're speaking to my issue. There are things, and they have properties. That's not the question. The question is, what do you apply numbers to? You don't apply numbers to properties. You don't apply the numbers to things. You apply numbers to groups of things. So you've got to take the property that you're talking about and use the property to make a group of things that have the property. Not just enough to have the property. What groups it under the property? What takes each one of the things that's hot and puts them together into a group? That groupiness is where the mind comes in. And that's where you have the problem.
But
Yeah.
why is it a problem for those groups not to exist before the human mind?
Because you want to use numbers to describe what the world was like at that time. And you want to say that even if human beings had never developed, the world would have been 14 billion years old, and it would have had these and these characteristics, and maybe no life because certain fundamental concepts would have been different, and it would have continued on in this way. You're describing a whole world with no mind to make the groups to which the numbers apply. So the numbers don't apply. Numbers apply to groups. Groups have to come into existence somehow. Yeah.
I think there's more of a question on the previous example.
Okay.
Emphasizing this one. Should we say God's understanding or conception of ideas is totally different to ours? So better with the meaning, if God's giving the word the meaning, then we're just tapping into that. That's sort of how I see it. I think I got it wrong.
I'm not hearing your words correctly. I'll try it again.
God's relationship to meaning or to the collection of numbers is quantifiably different to ours. His idea is totally different to ours.
Not the way I'm describing it. I'm describing God as a mind. Now, here I think maybe the right thing to say is that although God isn't a mind, he isn't less than a mind. He's infinitely more than a mind. It doesn't mean he isn't a mind, or doesn't project himself as a mind, or can't interact as a mind. It's just that doesn't describe what his essentially is, and doesn't exhaust what he is. I'm talking now about his activity, his mind activity, his mind presentation. That mind presentation has in it ideas. The idea is there, and one of the ideas is thinking about so-and-so. Just as we can think about so-and-so, we don't find that problematic because we experience it directly. We may have a difficulty in explaining it, but we know that it's there. This is what this is like. Around the middle of the century, there was a terrible problem in perception. Your retina has 2 dimensions, but you see a 3-dimensional world. How's that possible? You're getting 2-dimensional information, and you're seeing a 3-dimensional world. Doesn't seem to match up. Did anybody say, yeah, we're just hallucinating. We don't really see a 3-dimensional world. No, that's just a mistake. No. We steer our way through 3 dimensions pretty well, right? We just don't know how we do it, right? But well, there's no question that we do it. We're familiar with it. We experience it directly. So here too, thinking about something that we experience directly, we just don't have a good account of how we do it. Okay, but now if I say there's another mind analogous to ours, and it's thinking about, and it carries the aboutness as a mind carries it, right? And that fills in the gaps for where I'm not there to provide it. That's the basic idea, yeah.
I want to make sure I'm on the right track. Can this idea with grouping people and counting people, can that be expounded to say that if there are no minds thinking about something, that it's as if it doesn't exist? Is that then a further proof for Hashem, since he's always thinking about everything, he's perpetually renewing creation?
There are people who want to say something like that. There are. The other possibility is that you bring something into existence, like you paint a picture, and then when you finish and go on to other pursuits, the picture remains behind. That thought is part of history. Right? And that could be available to other people. It doesn't have to be present. Right? That's one possibility.
Okay, and so then what's to say, I guess on the flip side of that, I'm confused how, if I guess this would be an atheist perspective then, how something doesn't exist at all, even before we think of it. Like clearly those creatures existed, that we are now talking about counting from the past.
Well, the problem is there. It's much more natural, like he was talking about heat, or something that's black, right? It's that object that's black. The object is black when I'm not looking at it. The object, I could discover that it's black. It's hidden in the core of a mountain. I could discover that it's black. And of course, it's natural to say that it was black beforehand as well. Because the object is the black core. But here, the object is something abstract. The object is a group. And there aren't any groups lying on the table. There are pencils on the table, not groups on the table.
It's a human-made concept.
Okay, so it sounds like that. Yeah. That means it takes a mind to make it. The numbers apply to the thing that the mind makes. Then there's got to be a mind. Not a mind, there isn't that thing for the number to apply to. That's the problem. I taught set theory. That's a mathematical study. I was interested in the ontology of set theory. When you prove theorems, how much they has to exist. And only recently did I look up this issue. Well, what is a set? Oh boy. The fundamental idea underlying the entire study doesn't have a clear explanation. It doesn't have a clear description. It's just sort of, you think of them all together somehow. It's very sloppy, very, very disturbing that that's the foundation for the whole sophisticated mathematics. Yeah.
So, when we as humans connect one idea to another and connect that, continue to create connections between ideas, does that make us more godlike?
I would say yes, except for the so. In other words, I don't see that directly follows from what I've been saying, but it is in fact correct. Because one of the ways that God projects himself into the world is as intellect. And one of the qualities associated with making us in his form, not in his image, but in his form, is intellect. So yes, exercise of intellect in that way does make us more godlike. Well, godlike means like the way in which he projects himself into the world. Not like what he is, but how he projects into the world, yeah.
Aren't there certain objects or like piles of stuff that have a better aptitude for being made into sets, like prior to us thinking about them? Or is it our kind of mind which gives them that better aptitude? So for instance, taking mountain, pool of lava, and moon, and I have 3 things now. Whereas if it's like, there's like a baby zebra, and it gives birth to 4 more baby zebras, it feels like that thing has a better like affinity to be made into a set.
Okay, I'll just tell you a little bit. There are 2 fundamental concepts of set. He was trying before with one of them. One is that there are qualities, and you talk about the collection of all the things that each one of them has the quality. The other is the collection concept of set. There are things, and you collect together, put them in, and then it makes a difference whether they have anything in common or don't have anything in common. Now, each of these has terrible problems. Each of them has terrible problems. If you take qualities, you end up with paradoxes. Right away, Russell's paradox, other paradoxes. Right? If you take qualities unbridled, without any limitations, you end up with paradoxes. The other hand, if you talk about, you have a group, then you have things, then you make groups of things. Okay. Now how about groups of groups? How about groups of things and groups? Which you can do. In other words, you have a field. Now add sets of things to the field. Have a bit richer field. Now collect things for that richer field. But then you have a hierarchy. You have a hierarchy. And nothing on the higher level can be related to something on the lower level. Nothing on the higher level can be a member of a group that came earlier in the hierarchy. You can't loop back. When you have qualities, you can loop back. So the hierarchy is very artificial, but it's so structured it avoids paradoxes. But there are lots of things you want to say about that you can't say. You go to the other one, then you end up with paradoxes, and it's very, very difficult study. To my knowledge, no one has ever yet created a single treatment which captures the good features of each one in a consistent way. Yeah, this is Russell's theories of types. That's where he got it, but it was much too complicated. It much better. Zermelo's Frankel's set theory did it better later on. These were the things I used to teach. Yeah.
I'm sort of, I guess this, I guess we're calling on transcendental mind that you're proposing. Is it a solution or is it the solution you're suggesting? Because I imagine, Neoplatonists definitely could have ways of conceptualizing certain things, especially with mathematics, at least the questions that you're addressing.
Well, of course, as Alvin Plantinga writes, Neoplatonists, that's even worse. We can't agree on what Plato said. Indeed, as he says, among those who might be Platonists is Plato, but he might not. So it's a very it's a complex business. It's a complex business. But you see, their way of handling it may not be a solution to the problems that we're raising. For example, what he said is a standard thing to say. There's a quality called heat, and things have that quality. But then when you ask what qualities are, you get talk that is sort of off the groundwork. Well, it's something abstract. It's not in space and time anywhere, and it's immutable. Can't be changed in any way. Can't come into existence. Can't go out of existence. Sort of like a little god, I suppose. I mean,
It's in the whole necessary facts as.
And then you ask, well, but you just added something to your ontology, which is utterly unlike everything else that we know, and it's very difficult to explain what the relationships are between them, and you don't have a clear explanatory theory. When you're using mind, you're using something that you know exists, because you have a mind. And other people around have minds. So you're using something that you know exists, and you're just saying there's more mind than we thought. That's not like going from a physical world to abstract qualities. That's a big jump. One of my teachers was Nelson Goodman, who was interested in the program of nominalism, like medieval nominalism, where you don't have abstract qualities. Quine was in that program early on, and he gave it up. So either way, you're going to have problems. But the point is this: when you postulate abstract things, so you just postulate them, and they sit there and they do what you want them to do because you made them do it, but you have no independent reason to think of them as real. Like Quine used to say, if you need it for your theory, that's a reason to think it's real. Okay, but need means there's no other way to do it. Here's another way to do it on the basis of something that you know exists. You know the mind exists. So the question is, how much mind?
Yeah. Is this? Would you categorize this as an argument for God to a certain extent?
Okay, so that's the point. This is Alvin Plantinga wrote a paper called 24 or so Arguments for the Existence of God. Meaning, there are 24 philosophical problems. You can get it. It's a PDF on the net. 24 difficult philosophical problems, which, in a theistic context, are much more tractable. Much more, you can approach them. You could see how progress could be made. You could see a context in which they could be handled. Whereas without that, it seems to be hopeless. Well, one message would then be this: philosophy is struggling because it has detached itself from a portion of reality. Isn't it? Reality is inherently difficult, fragmented, unexplained, foreign, and so forth and so on. is that you've detached yourself from a certain context in which these problems do come together. They do have a way of being treated, and treated from a common source, same source each time.
That might be the coolest.
So it means that at least as a framework, it's a much richer and more supportive framework for this kind of philosophy. Now, of course, if you're not a philosopher, this doesn't mean anything to you. But if you are a philosopher, it should be something to you.
Yeah.
I happen to be a philosopher. I'm not apologizing.
Apologies to Plato and all the Neoplatonists.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so that's basically it.